Night had already settled over the village when this story truly began. Not the kind of night that arrives gently, but one that presses down, heavy with quiet. Fires had dimmed, doors were barred, children curled into sleep beside their mothers. Even the dogs had stopped pacing. The village, as it always did, surrendered itself to rest. All, except one woman. While every roof hid a dreaming soul, she remained awake, eyes open, breath steady, listening. She did not toss or turn. She did not pray for sleep to come. She did not lie awake waiting for morning. She chose not to sleep. And in a land where rest was believed to keep the world in balance, her wakefulness was not a small thing. What happens when a person denies the night its due? What does someone begin to notice when everyone else has closed their eyes? And how long can one human watch the dark before the dark begins to watch back? At first, no one spoke of it. Villages survive on silence as much as they do on truth. But soon whispers found their way through morning greetings. Families noticed unease where peace once lived. Dreams grew thin. Rest felt shallow. The elders, men and women who had memorized the language of signs and seasons, felt it most. They sensed a quiet shift, not loud enough to name, but deep enough to fear. They knew the old teachings. They remembered the warnings passed down in low voices beside dying fires. Watching too long was never harmless. This was not a story about a woman who could not sleep. It was about a woman who would not, and the village would learn, slowly, painfully, that wakefulness carries its own hunger. Because while the night appeared unchanged, while the moon continued its patient climb across the sky, something subtle had already begun to move. Not with footsteps, not with sound, but with attention. The kind of attention that waits. What followed altered the rhythm of that village forever. It unsettled bonds between families. It forced the elders to question rules they thought unbreakable. And when the truth finally surfaced, even those who believed they understood her wished they had asked fewer questions. Why did she choose wakefulness? What did she gain from seeing what others never saw? And when the night finally answered her presence, what did it take in return? This is the story of the woman who never slept, and the night that refused to let her go. As the sun sank behind the horizon, the village began its nightly transformation. Shadows stretched across the dirt paths, softened by the flicker of dying fires. The scent of smoke from the evening meal lingered in the air, mingling with the warm, earthy aroma of the earth after sunset. Each hut seemed to inhale the night, the thatched roofs closing themselves gently over their sleeping inhabitants. In the distance, the soft rhythm of drums marked the passage of time. Not loud, not urgent, but steady, steady enough to remind everyone of the heartbeat of the village. Every drum beat was a whisper of tradition, a signal that the world belonged equally to the living and to the night. Mothers called their children indoors. Voices carried softly across the fields, through the trees over the paths that led toward home. Footsteps slowed, doors were latched, blankets drawn close. The village exhaled into slumber, as it had done for countless generations. Sleep in this place was not a mere act of rest. It was a covenant, an invisible thread that tied humans to the rhythms of life. To lie down was to trust the unseen forces that walked with the night, to trust that dreams would speak truths, to trust that letting go of consciousness for a few hours would bring balance to the day that followed. The elders, the keepers of memory and ritual, guided this understanding. They knew the ways of the night, the patterns hidden within the shadows, and the lessons carried on the winds that whispered through the trees. They taught quietly that some things are seen only when eyes are closed, and that some truths exist only in the places dreams dare to go. Stories were passed beside the fire, tales of villagers who lingered awake too long, who sought to pry into the dark before dawn, only to find themselves forever changed. Every element of the night had meaning. The hoot of an owl could forewarn, the rustle of the grass might signal a message. The flicker of the fire could reveal what the moon had watched. Even the simplest act, the way a child's blanket fell or a hut door creaked in the wind, carried an unspoken language understood by those who honored the night's ways. And yet, despite the rhythm, there was always a subtle warning woven into the calm, that the night was patient, but it remembered. that eyes left open too long could see things no one intended to be seen. That curiosity without caution could disturb the fragile balance the village had nurtured over centuries. Under the moon, life moved in quiet patterns. The river's soft babble, the faint whisper of leaves in the breeze, the measured hooves of animals returning to their pens, all formed a rhythm the villagers had learned to trust. In this shared agreement between humans and the unseen, the night was both protector and teacher. This was normal. Here, every villager slept. Every heart found rest. Every soul allowed the dark to hold them. And in return, the night held the village. And yet somewhere, even as this harmony stretched across the sleeping homes, the first subtle disturbance began. It was almost imperceptible, a shift so gentle that only a few senses, sharpened by generations of respect for the night, could detect it. For the village believed, as they always had, that nothing good comes from watching the dark for too long. That the night, if watched too closely, might remember you in ways you do not wish to be remembered. It was in this precise moment, as fires dimmed, as drums softened, as the world seemed to breathe in unison, that she, the woman who would not sleep, chose her path. And though no one yet knew it, the delicate trust between the village and the night, the quiet order of their world, would never be the same. Before the night began to notice her, she moved through the village like a shadow, present yet somehow separate. People passed by her without realizing the weight she carried, the quiet vigilance that shaped every step she took. She was part of the rhythm of life, yet apart from it. Children waved as she passed, and some older ones followed her eyes, sensing her awareness of things most adults overlooked. A broken fence post, a lantern that swayed too far from its hook, a faint whisper of wind that carried secrets from the river. Her home sat at the edge of the village, where the earth smelled of river mud and the air hummed with the songs of night insects. It was modest, yet tidy, every mat in place, every pot in its corner. She preferred it that way. Control mattered, even in small things. Every item, every detail was her quiet rebellion against unpredictability. A small thing, perhaps, but in a world where chaos could seep unnoticed, these tiny structures gave her a sense of safety. Among her neighbors, she had a reputation of calm reliability. Villagers liked her presence without fully understanding it. She never sought praise, never demanded attention, but her insight was quietly respected. She remembered details others forgot: birthdays, names, subtle gestures. She noticed things before they happened, and sometimes even before anyone else realized something was amiss. That awareness gave her an almost unnatural steadiness, though she carried it quietly, almost secretly, as though it were a hidden weapon. Her relationships were measured. She had companions, yes, but not friends who demanded much of her time, nor family who leaned too heavily on her strength. She preferred subtle bonds, connections built on trust but not dependence. There was a safety in distance, a protection in observation. She could see people for who they were without exposing herself. In her mind, this was wisdom, not cruelty, though some might have labeled it loneliness. And yet, beneath her composed exterior, fear thrummed quietly, persistently. Not fear of others, not fear of misfortune, but fear of surrender. Sleep was not rest for her. It was a relinquishing of control. To close her eyes was to leave herself unguarded, exposed to the unknown forces she believed drifted through the village at night. Dreams, the villagers said, were messages, but to her they were dangers. Sleep was not trust, it was risk. Every night, when the village slipped beneath the protective blanket of slumber, she felt exposed, vulnerable, forgotten. Her fear was not born from arrogance or pride. It was born from the quiet knowledge that those who closed their eyes could never fully see what lurked in the hours between dusk and dawn. And she wanted to see. She wanted to know. She wanted to remember. And so she began to stay awake. At first, for only a few hours, she convinced herself it was temporary, a precaution, a harmless vigil. But nights bled into nights. Hours of wakefulness became a habit, a slow, deliberate ritual. It was not defiance, it was survival. It was control over a world that seemed to slip through the fingers of the sleeping. The village, unaware, carried on in harmony. Fires burned low, drums softened, children dreamed, elders whispered their warnings by the dying light of embers. And she, sitting quietly in her home, noticed everything they could not. The soft creak of a floorboard that suggested wind, the rustle of leaves outside that hinted at small animals, the subtle vibration of earth as the river moved in its nightly course. Every detail mattered. Every sound was catalogued, every shadow observed. She began to understand the night in a way no one else could. There was a language to it, a rhythm that moved beneath the ordinary. And with each night as she remained awake, the line between observation and awareness deepened. She felt the pulse of the village, the heartbeat of the wind, the quiet stirrings of the unseen. What others experienced as silence, she felt as an orchestration of life, of stories, of hidden truths. Her wakefulness became both refuge and cage. She was safe in the sense that nothing unexpected could surprise her, but isolated in ways she had not imagined. She watched while the world slept, and in her watching, she saw beauty, yes, but also the fragile fragility of the village's trust in its own rhythm. Each night, she learned the delicate balance of the world and began to see how easily it could tilt, how quickly harmony could unravel if one person dared to observe too closely. Her fear, subtle yet unrelenting, was that sleep might rob her of her place in the world, that if she closed her eyes she would vanish from its memory, that her existence, her awareness, her very self might be folded away in dreams she could not control. And so, the woman chose wakefulness, night after night, not for power, not for pride, but for the quiet conviction that to rest was to surrender everything she had worked so hard to guard. And yet this choice was neither simple nor without consequence. For while she remained alert, unseen shifts began around her. The village, so reliant on trust and routine, began to feel the ripple of her defiance of sleep. The air carried a tension that some could not name, a subtle disturbance. Nothing overt, just the faintest thread of imbalance that would, over time, grow into something impossible to ignore. She had become a guardian of her own vigilance, and unknowingly, the first stirrings of change were already moving through the village. She remained awake, aware, unblinking, and as she did, the night began to take notice, slowly, patiently, indifferently at first, and yet it began to watch back. Her choice, born of fear and quiet self-preservation, was the seed of a transformation that would ripple far beyond her home, beyond the village path, beyond the fires that burned low at night. What she did not yet understand, what she could not yet know, was that her wakefulness was no longer hers alone. It was entwined with the night itself, and the night remembered. And so the woman remained awake, not from defiance, not from arrogance, but from fear, fear of surrender, fear of being unseen, fear of forgetting. And it was this fear, paired with her quiet courage, that would set the stage for the first ripple, the first strange event, the moment when the world she knew began to shift, forever. The first night she chose not to lie down, the village slept as it always did. Fires burned low, shadows stretched across mud walls, and the drums of distant ceremonies faded into the stillness of the air. She sat by her small window, gazing at the moon, her eyes wide, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Nothing happened. No tremor of wind, no whisper of danger, no shadow that should not have been there. And yet the quiet unsettled her. The absence of events, the lack of drama, was itself strange. She had expected nothing. Yes, but not this. Usually the night carried subtle messages, subtle movements she could interpret. A rustle in the reeds, a bird that called too late, the soft, eerie sway of a lantern. Tonight it was all still, too still. She sensed the edges of reality pressing close, as if the air itself were holding its breath. By midnight, she began to notice the smallest anomalies. The fire that had burned steadily for hours flickered in ways she could not explain. Shadows moved not with the light, but seemingly against it. She could hear the subtle beat of distant wings, though no bird passed her field of vision. Each detail was faint, too faint for anyone else to notice. Yet for her, they were unmistakable. Her senses, sharpened by wakefulness, picked up the subtlest vibrations of the world as though it were testing her. The second night, she lingered longer, aware now of patterns she could not ignore. The fire sputtered strangely, casting uneven light across her home. Outside, the animals, the dogs, the cats, even the rodents that scurried in the dark, were restless. Their eyes glimmered unnaturally in the faint light. Their movements were jerky, hesitant, as if they too noticed something different, something unseen. She heard things that no one else could. A low, almost inaudible hum that threaded through the air. A shifting of leaves that made no sense in the absence of wind. The soft, almost imperceptible footfall of something moving at the edge of the trees. And yet no figure could be seen. Her heart beat faster, though she kept her posture calm. There was a message in these signs, though she could not yet read it. At one point, she thought she heard a voice. Not loud, not commanding, but soft, deliberate, almost like the whisper of the earth itself. She could not make out the words, only the cadence, the rhythm of intention behind them. Her mind warned her to heed the caution, to lie down, to return to what the village called normal. And yet, she did not. She resisted out of instinct, out of fear, out of necessity. Every instinct told her that to yield would erase her presence. To close her eyes, to fall into sleep, was to surrender her place in the world. And so she remained awake, observing. Each flicker of shadow, each unusual sound, each subtle shift in the night, they became data points, threads weaving a story she could not yet understand. Even as she tried to rationalize what she was seeing, what she was hearing, the unease grew. The village around her slept in harmony, trusting in the night to restore and protect them. But she sensed a subtle distortion in that harmony. Things were not as they seemed. Patterns she had learned, rhythms she had counted on, no longer felt reliable. The second night brought the first hint that she was no longer alone in her wakefulness. Something, or someone, or something like someone, was aware of her. She could not see it, could not hear it clearly, yet she felt its gaze as though the night itself had turned its attention toward her. It was subtle at first, the smallest shift in air pressure, the faintest shadow in her periphery, but unmistakable. Something was watching, something was waiting. She felt the moral tension building. Every instinct told her to sleep, to obey the natural order, to trust what generations of villagers had trusted. But she could not. She could not surrender. To close her eyes now would be to admit weakness, to admit vulnerability, to allow forces beyond her comprehension to touch her. And so she remained, vigilant, watchful, unblinking. By the end of the night, her body ached from hours of stillness. Her eyes burned. Her mind raced, cataloging every anomaly, every small irregularity. And yet she had learned nothing concrete. No figure appeared. No event unfolded. No punishment arrived. Only awareness, only tension, only the undeniable feeling that the night itself had noticed her. It was not fear exactly, not yet. It was anticipation, the kind that grows slowly in the marrow, a quiet pressure that fills the space between heartbeats. Something had shifted, though she could not name it. The village slept, untroubled, but she now knew she had crossed a threshold. She had stepped into a space few ever entered, and in that space, the ordinary rules no longer applied. She sensed that consequences were stirring. She sensed that stories would follow her wakefulness. She sensed that her choice to remain awake, small, personal, protective, was becoming part of something larger, something alive. The night, patient and vast, had noticed her, and in that realization, she felt a weight she could neither measure nor escape. She was awake, the world was asleep, and the first ripple of change had begun.